All right, let's go. Hey everyone, welcome to Reddit Roast, where we pick apart the profiles that have been posted on the Reddit RMBA thread, particularly the people asking for profile evaluations, and basically decide or give them an idea of whether they have a chance at the target schools, understand the strengths and the weaknesses of their profile, and what they can do to improve their chances of getting admitted. Mal, who have we got today?
So we have a pretty diverse crowd today, Sam. There's an Indian
Hi.
consultant in Canada with a fashion family business catering to French clients.
Okay.
We've got a North African immigrant with a side hustle baking cookies for local businesses. We have a Brazilian entrepreneur who bought a failing food business and sold it for six times of what he paid. And we've got one of the strongest profiles you've ever seen on a Reddit roast, which is a Fintech Chief of Staff who also happens to bowl recreationally. Should
Awesome.
we get into the first profile then?
Yeah, let's do it. Here we go.
All right. INSEAD Jan 2027 intake. Female, 26, Indian passport, but with a Canadian permanent residency and is applying from Canada. Undergrad, a bachelor's in economics and a minor in comp science from a top three school in Canada with a 3.33 GPA. Graduated in 3 years and also did the honors program, so OP is kind of hoping that that counts for a bit. The GMAT is at a 615, but OP is planning on doing it again in Feb. Work, tech consulting at a big 5 or 6 consulting firm, approaching 5 years of experience, two promotions in the cloud data space, two high impact projects. I see some letters of recommendation from a current manager and a work mentor. Very closely involved in the pro bono consulting practice at my firm, ops lead for all of Canada. Pitched the non-profit I'm involved in with outside of work at to a panel of MDs and got 40K for it, and is staffing that team right now. Extracurriculars, youngest board member for a non-profit that works for vulnerable youth. Lots of high impact work, considering an LOR from the board chair or president. Trained to be a board member for non-profit boards. Attended the UN Summit of the Future in NYC. Hobbies, art, and tennis. Goals PM with a social focus or consulting in the Middle East. OP says that her family business is in fashion. They've worked with French clients for 20 years. So France is great for networking, and that's probably why OP was also looking at INSEAD. What do you think of her profile, Sam?
Yeah, mixed. Let's dive into it. Academics, right. 3.3 GPA is not ideal. I understand there is this sort of these mitigating factors or these reasons. Going to be important to make that clear. Unfortunately, either way, that GPA is going to be a little bit of a headwind. The 615 GMAT doesn't help either. That is, that translates to about a 650 or so on the old GMAT, which is below INSEAD's average. And yeah, not ideal. I'm not going to ascribe much weight to the aiming to get it closer to 700 because everybody's trying to get it closer to 700. I've seen too many people aim and not get that score they're aiming for. So I'm a bit wary on the GMAT front. In terms of demographic, female Indian is definitely overrepresented. Applying from Canada with Canadian PR and therefore work permit, helps, but still overrepresented for sure. In terms of work, I didn't know Big Five or Six was a thing. I've heard of Big
Me
Four and
neither.
I've heard of
Yeah.
MBB. I've never heard of Big Five or Six. I think it's a consulting firm that is sort of, I would argue, maybe even tier three in the sort of rankings of consulting firms. Not ideal. Promotions is good. Years of work experience at five is, really what they're, it's the right timing for MBAs. In the cloud data space, it sounds like some sort of tech implementation, tech consulting, very, very competitive as a group. In terms of extracurriculars, I think this is where this candidate shines. Board member or junior board member, I think it was for an extracurricular. Been involved in Dragon's Den type simulations where they've presented this a non-profit to the board, to their work company. Quite a lot of interesting extracurriculars there that I think will add to particularly the leadership side of this profile. Maybe there's a community angle that can be spun there as well, which the schools will really like. Now, in terms of goals, I'm wary on this. Obviously goals can change and we can work with this, but I think what we've got right now is not great. We've got everything from PM with a social focus to fashion to consulting in the Middle East, and there's like France, and it's just all over the place. Absolutely all over the place. So I don't like that as it currently stands. So overall, not great profile. GMAT could come in high, which would help, but as things, and the goals could be improved, but as things stand, not particularly impressed.
Okay. So we have a few questions here as well.
Okay.
OP wants to know what her chances are for INSEAD's round 1 Jan intake.
Yeah. There's a couple of factors that, as I say, a couple of variables here. One is obviously the GMAT. Two, the languages. INSEAD have a very clear requirement for a second language at a good level, preferably a second European language at a good level, and studying for a third language. Now, there's no mention of languages whatsoever in this profile. If OP has, like an Indian language, for example, that is fluent as well as English, it sort of counts, but it's not a second European language, which is really what INSEAD would like. No indication either of a third language being studied, maybe being Canadian. There's some French classes in the background potentially there, but I'm wary on the languages front, which is going to be a big thing for INSEAD. And then all of the reasons I said about the profile itself, not great chances for INSEAD Jan intake as things stand.
So then what can OP do then to best position itself for an admit to INSEAD?
I want to see that GMAT north of about 685 for one. I want to see a really strong optional essay to explain the GPA and that this was, this is not, it looks low, but it wasn't. And here's why. I'd like to see some clarity over languages. If OP has a bit of French already, for example, time to start some language classes and frame that as a almost fluent language, if possible. And it's time for OP to do some career structuring and really figure out what that career trajectory looks like, because right now it's a mess.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of career structuring, just in terms of goals, do you think the long-term goal could be rejoining the family business?
Probably should be, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the short-term goal should be something that leads to that, right? So if the long-term goal is fashion with French clients, or I don't really fully understand what the long-term goal, the work is, what the family business is. It just says in the fashion space with French clients and that it's about 20 years old. Whatever that role is, whatever that long-term role at the family business is, the short-term post-MBA role should be a natural stepping stone to that. So it sounds like the fashion industry in Paris would probably be the best stepping stone. It sounds like social impact, like PM with social focus, probably has very little relevance at all. I'm not seeing, consulting in the Middle East is probably a backup, as that's sort of where OP already is. That's where she already is working. So I think plan A, short term, should be probably fashion in France, leading to the family business with consulting as a backup. That's the career narrative that makes most sense to me intuitively.
Okay. All right. I think we've covered everything for OP. Are we ready to move on to our profile 2?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Profile 2. Rolling the dice on round 2 this year, which means that OP's already applied. Demographics, 29 Black USA. GRE 330, well done. 3.59 GPA in Pol Science and Economics from Cornell. Work experience 6 years approx. Currently working as the Chief of Staff at a Series B Fintech. Previously was the Chief of Staff at a Series B AI startup, was a PE associate, and had 2 years at MBB. Post MBA goals, biz ops at a neobank or a larger scale fintech. Long-term goal is fintech entrepreneurship. Target schools, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton and Sloan. Recommenders, head of sales from my current startup. OP says CEO is very anti-B school, would not be supportive. CEO, founder of my prior startup, who is a GSB alum. EC's mentor to local underserved high schoolers, junior board member for small LGBT-oriented non-profit, various volunteer stunts for local electoral campaigns, and a recreational league bowling team captain.
How good!
A lot of lots of cool things there. What do you think?
Really impressive. Really impressive. Let's start academically. So, 3.59 undergrad GPA is bang on the average of 3.6 of the M7s from Cornell as well. Really, really nice. We have a 330 GRE, which is a little bit above the averages of these schools as well. So academically, very, very strong. Demographic wise, 29 years old, exactly the right age for an MBA, Black, USA, domestic candidate, very underrepresented, very URM, and the schools will love this profile. Professional, really good progress. Chief of staff roles, interesting companies, including the MBB Foundation after undergrad. So really strong professional experience as well that they're going to like. The extracurriculars, really strong again, mentoring underserved high schoolers. Unless that kind of, you play that into like the Black community angle, maybe that's impactful, but you see a lot of mentorship. What I really like is the junior board member of the LGBT orientated nonprofit. Not sure if OP is LGBT themselves. If they are, that will help on the demographics perspective. If not, very easy to position as an ally and quite a compelling story there for any leadership or community focused essays, backed up by this recreational league. Really interesting extracurriculars, really like shows some flair. In terms of goals, clear, logical, right? If OP is already in sort of fintech and payment services, moving into a neobank and doing fintech entrepreneurship makes perfect sense as a goal. Overall, one of the strongest profiles we've seen this year. I really, really like it.
So then, given that OP's already applied, what do you think his chances are at Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, and so on?
Well, we had results earlier this week, interview announcements from HBS earlier this week. So I think it looks like OP submitted this right before the interviews came out. And to be blunt, I think if OP didn't get an interview at HBS, he fumbled in his application somewhere. He really should have got one. If I'm right, OP, and you do have a HBS interview offer that's just come through, get in touch and we'll help you with HBS mock interviews. Zach and Nanako in our team have both fairly recent HBS grads that have been through the process themselves and are extremely strong interviewers. So we can really put you through your paces and prepare you. I think very strong profile. And if he hasn't got the interview, he messed something up and should really be looking to reapply next year.
Yeah, and I can see in the comments that OP is really feeling like the waiting part for the interviews is quite brutal for him.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that's resolved now, OP, and you have some admits. Please, update your profile if you do. We'd love to know.
Great stuff. Next profile.
Next profile. Profile 24 male. I'm looking to apply to MBA programs in round 1 later this year. Demographic, white male, North African immigrant, dual citizen, GPA 3.5 from a T50 school in computer science, and had civil engineering in the first 2 years, targeting a 695 plus on the GMAT, so not taking the GMAT yet. OP did take the GRE last year for a different master's program and got a 320 score with a perfect quant. Work experience, 1 engineering internship, 1 consulting internship, and is working as a consultant for the last 2 years. OP will also have about 2.5 years of experience by the time he applies and 3.5 by matriculation. Extracurriculars, a cookie business. How fun, with a partner where we supply cookies for various local businesses. I am managing the finances and strategy, and by the time of applying, we'll have $50,000 in sales. OP thinks he has a pretty interesting story, good recommenders, some schools in there: Wharton, HBS, Tuxton, CBS, Yale, and Darden. What do you think of OP's not cookie cutter profile? Sorry, I had to make that.
Pun intended. Well done. Okay, academics, 3.5 from a T50. A little bit below average of the M7s. T50 is not going to carry much weight either. Civil engineering is a solid program. Not ideal, though. Targeting 695 currently has a 320. Look, a 320 is not going to be enough, particularly that verbal score. It's not going to be enough for those top programs, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. And I'm not going to put any weight to the target score because everybody's targeting, 700. So that doesn't count for a huge amount. In terms of demographic, very overrepresented as a white male. Maybe the North African immigrant and the dual citizenship helps. Not sure for exactly where from, but that will be a factor. I think the bigger factor from the demographic is the age. It looks like OP is on the younger side. If 3.5 years at matriculation is a little bit on the young side. It's not too young. I'm more worried that at the time of applying, whether OP has got stories to work with and a clear career narrative, and whether OP's recommenders have got lots of experience that they can write good recommendations with. A little bit on the young side, basically. On the extracurriculars, this cookie business is awesome, right? This is the sort of thing that they love to see. You could frame that even as this is a revenue number. We don't know how much profit. But you could frame it almost as a professional experience or as an extracurricular. There's kind of different ways of going about this. Either way, I'm sure OP has learned some really interesting lessons from this. So really, really good extracurricular. I wonder if there's a community angle as well, right? These are local businesses with cookies. Like I'm imagining like Girl Scouts involved, and like it could be a really good community story as well. So cool extracurriculars. Now, the professional, it's a bit more generic. We have engineer. Well, we have computer science, which led to engineering internship and a consulting internship. And now as a consultant, we don't know what type of consultant. I'm not seeing a particularly strong like career focus or area of focus, area of interest here. Very, very generalist. That will need to be refined when it comes down to the application. The cookie part is the most unique, by far, the unique part of this application. In other words, overall, then reasonable GPA and work experience, nothing flashy. Academics and maybe age, potentially the slight weak points here.
And what about those schools? What do you think OP's chances are there?
Okay. To be blunt, I don't see OP getting into Wharton and Harvard. The work experience is just not enough of interesting, impactful work experience. Certainly that I'm getting from this roast. Maybe there's more in the background. But if that consulting is MBB and has been super impactful, maybe there's some good stories there. But if that consulting is big 4 or big 5 or 6 or whatever it was the last person said, I don't see Wharton and Harvard as credible applications. But the rest of the M7 and the other schools on this list, I think, are plausible, particularly if that GMAT comes in around the 695 that OP is aiming for.
Okay, so it should be around this in the high 600s, right? The GMAT score, ideally.
Yeah, look, if OP is going to wants to really throw his hat in the ring for Wharton and Harvard, that needs to start with a 7. Okay. Even then, I don't particularly rate his chances. I would say that 6, I think more likely is bottom of the M7 and sort of high T10, sort of T15s, like these schools. And for that, I think a 6.85, 6.95 would be sort of the score that I think OP can get, given these great quantability that we know, and B, sort of in line with expectations for those schools.
Okay, and you said that OP has a very broad profile. So what do you think, what kind of goals work best for him?
Yeah, so to reiterate, he's gone from computer science to engineering to consulting to cookies. Yeah. And I know cookies is sort of on the side, but just like a lot going on there. And what I would like OP to do in the goals essays, for example, Harvard Essay 1, where they ask, what do you want to do and why? You basically need to identify something very strong and compelling about what you've done in the past and extend that into the future. So, for example, a good way of doing this could be to find an overlap between OP's interests and their work. For example, this cookies business has taught me something. I want to pivot my career to tackle that challenge. Or maybe long-term goal is to build out this cookie business full time. That could also be unique and interesting. But the main thing is to try and combine the consulting skills that OP has, which will be, if that's tech consulting, that'll be one set of skills. If it's management consulting, that'll be another set of skills. But combine those with the interests and the unique parts of the profile, which is the cookies. I don't know exactly how those merge, but that's the area that I would be playing with if this was a client of ours, and the area that I would be spending our initial sessions exploring and digging into detail about.
All right. Okay. Okay, I think that's all of my questions that I had about this profile.
Cool.
Should we move on? Our last profile
Yeah.
for the day.
Let's just see what the comments are
Comments?
saying. You'll not be attending HSW. That's pretty blunt, but
Ooh.
in line with what I've said.
Yeah.
I think there was this line unremarkable in there, which is pretty consistent with what I've been saying. The maturity angle, basically being quite on the younger side, consistent with what I was saying as well. And yeah, look, the impacts, like if you can pack 4 to 5 years of results and experience into 2.5 years, you'll be fine. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think the comments are pretty consistent with what I've said, and backs up my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of them is just like, have you been promoted? We don't know much about OP's consulting work so far. So,
Exactly, which is going to be really key. Yeah.
yes. All right. Okay, profile 4. Let's,
Not that one, sorry. Same one. Profile 4.
yes, 28 male, Brazilian. Should I even bother applying to top programs or be realistic? 3.0 GPA, IT degree from a non-target Brazilian school, GMAT not taken yet, still studying. 6 years of experience, 3 years IT at a financial co-op, and then 3 years owning and operating a business. IT phase, 3 years managing infra at a financial cooperative, implemented automation, and also, but then hit a ceiling, couldn't fix the bigger strategic problems. So then the OP bought a failing food retail business and then sold it 3 years later for 6 times of what he paid. 140% revenue growth, did everything from scratch, and the goal is now to work in distressed equity or turnarounds. So OP says that my strength was always operational but not academic. Grades were mediocre, school was meh, but I can fix broken businesses. I like that part. A question in there, we'll get to that. What do you think overall, Sam?
Yeah, look, as a OP is well aware of, 3.0 GPA is pretty bad.
Yeah.
In IT is not particularly sexy, although he's using that in his career, which is quite interesting. Non-target school is also not helpful. A 720 GPA GMAT would be good, but hasn't been scored yet, so we don't know. And most people in the practice tests score a solid 20, 30 points higher than the real thing. So let's say OP comes in with like a 695 or 685. Okay, but not great. So academic not shining, but as OP says, he's well aware of that. That was he knew. So demographic, Brazilian is underrepresented for sure, and won't be doesn't do OP any harm. 28-year-old male doing basically private equity is slightly more on the overrepresented side, but still solid. Age is good as well. 28 years old, right at the right point in his career for an MBA, which is nice. No mention whatsoever of extracurriculars, which is a bit of a pink flag. If we put OP in the finance bucket with the private equity people, which I think is probably what will end up happening, then he's possibly fallen into this trap of private equity, finance, banking, bro, with no extracurriculars.
Yeah.
And we see that a lot. That's a pink flag for sure. Professional, yeah, really cool story turning around these businesses, and that is going to carry some weight. I think that if there's a weakness to this professional profile, there doesn't seem to be any brands in there, right? This is all like do-it-yourself business turnaround stuff. He hasn't done it with any of the big, there's some big well-known Brazilian PE firms that are doing this at scale. It's not those; it's on his own, and added that to a non-target Brazilian undergrad. So there's basically no brands on OP's resume. That's going to be potentially a concern. In terms of goals, on the one hand, this does make sense to work in distressed equity turnarounds. It's basically like doing what he's been doing at a bigger scale. On the other hand, private equity, VC, these sorts of PE firms that he's talking about are very difficult to break into. There's not a classic pipeline going from business schools, even the M7, into these private equity firms, which makes it very, very difficult. OP is going to be relying on his own network to break into these companies. So that needs to be made very, very clear in the essays that if OP already has an in to these target companies, otherwise he's just throwing himself in with the I want to break into PE bucket. And there's a lot of them, and a lot of them have got, rotational programs at Goldman Sachs on their resume, and he's just not going to be able to compete with those. So that's on the work and goals side. So overall, solid profile. GMAT's going to be important, particularly the English part of the GMAT. And I think the balance that's going to be struck is, yes, on the one hand, cool work experience. On the other hand, no brands. That's going to be the sort of the balance. I think that, turning around, I think the schools are going to be wondering, like, okay, so you've turned around a business in Portuguese. Does that translate to, and your academics aren't great, how does that translate to your classroom contribution in English? Right. And your post-MBA goals of working at a big PE firm in English, which is super competitive, it's going to be tough.
Okay, so then OP is also wondering if he has a realistic shot at the top schools, HBS, Wharton, Stanford, LBS or INSEAD, or should he focus on T15 to T25 range?
Yeah, look, there's a few questions buried in there. I mean, I think Harvard, Stanford, Wharton with a 3.0 GPA, presumably not great on GMAT. We'll see on that, with no brands to speak of. Honestly, I think probably forget about HSW. LBS and INSEAD, possible, right? There's a bit more leeway there. I think particularly if OP speaks English and Portuguese. I was saying about having that second European language for INSEAD, LBS like that as well. Well, OP has English, Portuguese, and maybe like studying another language. This is a kind of profile that INSEAD, with a language and international perspective, that they like. I would say, bottom of the M7, T10, T15, LBS, INSEAD, that's where OP should be targeting.
Okay, and what do you think he can do to improve his profile at this stage?
Yeah, well, let's assume he's applying round one next year, which I think is sort of a reasonable assumption. That's about 9 months away. The first thing is nail the GMAT. Obviously, that's going to carry a lot of weight and reassurance, both on the ability to do tests in English, the English part of the GMAT, but also offsetting the GPA, which is weak. So that is really going to carry a lot of weight. The other thing is get some extracurriculars in. I mentioned in my overview that this was a pink flag. It's a pink flag because it looks a lot like OP's been turning around businesses, hasn't had that much in the way of extracurricular experience. We had a previous roast earlier in the discussion with somebody who was a junior board member at a nonprofit, like nothing like that here. So there are question marks over the extracurricular contribution, which particularly the American schools care about a lot. In the next 8 to 9 months, you've got a window to start building up that extracurricular activity. Ideally, like something that you've already been involved with a little bit, build that out and turn that into something formal that you can put on your resume and really write about in your essays. You've got time to do that. That would be the two main kind of factors that I would point to for OP.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that roast, Sam. We've
Cool.
got a bonus. Shall we move
Let's
on
talk
to
about
that
it.
then? Yeah. Okay. Laid off post MBA admission. Now, this is an interesting one. We've been seeing a few posts like this in our MBA thread with this job market. Let's see what OP is saying. Looking for some perspective from folks who've been through consulting recruiting or on the other side of the table. I was laid off from my role at the end of 2025 as part of a broader restructuring. About 2 weeks before that, I interviewed for an M7 MBA program and was admitted in December. So now between now and matriculation, I'm weighing a mix of short-term consulting or project work, fellowships, or possibly a pre-MBA internship. But I'm curious how consulting firms generally view a gap like this, especially when it's caused by a layoff late in the cycle. Is a short employment gap a real red flag for MBB or T2 consulting firms, or is this fairly common post layoffs? And does it materially matter what you do during that gap, as long as you can explain it well? What do you think, sir?
So this is an MBA applicant who's got the offer, then got made redundant, and wants to break into MBB consulting after the MBA, and they're worried about whether this redundancy is going to be a factor. So the first thing is, I mean, short answer is no. It's not going to be a deal breaker. It is not uncommon, especially in this job market. And, you know, with a few years of work experience and an MBA under your belt, frankly, like a 4-month job gap, it's water under the bridge. It's not going to matter. That said, there are some important factors here to consider. One is don't lie. Now, obviously, it depends slightly on when the redundancy happens during the process here. But let me be abundantly clear on this. Schools check with companies that you say you've worked at, particularly your most recent company that you've worked at. They check with HR the title, the dates, salary. They check that stuff. So if you lie to the schools about your current role, they will know. So that's the first thing to make clear. Now, I think OP in this case, it's not really a factor because he's got the admit. That's not going to get rescinded. So it doesn't really matter what he tells the school now, but I'm just sort of, as a general point, I want to make that really, really clear. It might be worth proactively updating the school in his case to be able to negotiate financial aid. Now, again, it depends on where he's up to in the process, but a lot of schools, after giving you the admit, you enter into a financial aid scholarship negotiation discussion. And if OP's just lost his job, there might be a more stronger argument to be made for give me some money, please, which OP should definitely pursue because those numbers could be big, right? We're talking easily 30, 40, 50K a year in financial aid if he does that really well. Then the other thing is so we've agreed that the schools don't care. We've agreed that the MBB consultancies don't care. So then the next question is, what should he be doing during that gap, or she potentially be doing during that gap? If it's not going to be, this gap is not going to be a problem, as I've said, but it could work to his advantage, her advantage, if she uses that time period in a really interesting way. In other words, something that is very, very accretive to the consulting goals. I'm thinking pro bono consulting, for example, and doing a really impactful pro bono consulting project that could easily come up in an MBB interview, would be super helpful. There's a company called Impact Consulting, I believe, ic.com or something like that. You can Google it, that do this kind of thing. And between now and the MBA, 4 to 6 months, you've got a great window where you could tell them, look, I've only got this window. I want to do one engagement, staff me on something impactful. And that could be really valuable for your MBB application process. Also, to be blunt, to be frank, use some of that time as a rest period. I cannot imagine how stressful it must have been to have your MBA interviews, get made redundant, and then receive the offer. What an emotional roller coaster that must have been. The MBA is going to be intense, particularly an M7 MBA is going to be intense. Also use that 4 to 6 month period to relax so that you're in a great mental space going into the MBA, because that will also be super important to getting the most out of the program. So to answer the questions then, two questions. One, is it a red flag? It's not a red flag, just be transparent. 2, does it matter what you do? Yes, use it to your advantage, do an impact consulting engagement, and then relax, would be my advice.
And I think in the comments we can see there's a few other applicants who've been through the same situation, so hope you're not alone. Yeah, there's people saying they're agreeing with you. So I'm like, it's not that big a deal. They don't really.
The reality of the market.
Yeah.
Found a quick contract gig. Yeah.
Exactly.
Nice.
The MBA internship is a smart move, or some fractional consulting.
Really
Travel.
good. Travel, relax, get into the right mindset. Like we were saying, travel here. I think it'll look like you've been a crappy employee if you try and get a full-time job now, knowing you'll quit in 4 to 6 months.
4 to 6 months, yeah.
It's also fair. That's why having a defined contract, defined agreement over this period would be really nice. And you could make that clear on your resume post MBA as well. So I think broadly people aligned with what I've said. Quite a few interesting comments there. A bit blunt there. Nobody cares.
Somebody said, enjoy your fun employment.
Fun employment. Yeah, exactly. All right then. Okay. Great stuff.
Yeah, good roast then.
Good roast. Thank you very much. And if you've enjoyed today's roast and you'd like to have your profile reviewed constructively by Mal and I, or by John and I, feel free to send over a link and we'll include it in the next roast. And if you're looking for an MBA admissions consultant, either in round 3 this year or round 1 of 2026, September 26, then get in touch. We are currently taking on our clients for that period. Mel, thank you very, very much. Have a lovely weekend.
Thank you. You too.
See ya.